As previously mentioned, that hideous strength appears to be only a fight between Mark and Jane over their marriage, and then it grows larger, and it's a fight between St. Anne's and Nice. And finally, midway through the novel, we realize it's an even larger fight. It is between logrus and Britain. What exactly is logrus? Logrus is an idea that is drawn from Charles Williams' work about a spiritual or city of God that is inhabited or remains within Britain itself. While the city of man is what most of us live in and what most of us see, the logrus is the city of God that is unseen and sometimes lies dormant while people do not pay attention to the spiritual reality, the things that are at stake for the kingdom of God to continue and to be perpetuated. And again, this is a Charles Williams idea that comes into this work, and as we've seen quite a bit, that a lot of the Inklings were heavily influenced by the King Arthur stories, by the mythic realities that they felt showed a lot of the myth that became fact. A lot of the Christian story was represented well in these King Arthur stories. So let's look at logrus and its effect on that hideous strength. When we're first introduced to the conflict's supernatural character, we hear that it's a conspiracy against the human race between the Eldils and the Dark Eldils. And thankfully, it's McPhee that tells this to Jane, and she said that all the strangeness of everything that he was saying sounded more normal coming from someone who is as skeptical and as empirically based as someone like McPhee. But he explains that all Britain, which has been so long familiar to him as a scholar, rose up like a solid thing. This is Dimble actually reflecting on this. The little Christian sites, the ancient creatures, the elves and ogres, these are the things that Dimble has been studying as myths, but as he begins to look for Merlin, they become facts, they become real. Logrus takes place in these ancient stories, the remnants of the reality. You can think of Lord of the Rings, in which Éomer is talking to Aragorn, and Éomer says hobbits are things from children's stories and legends. And Aragorn says, yes, the next generation will also write legends of this time, but that is not up to us what they say. In the same sense that the King Arthur stories, what Lewis is trying to argue, and Williams and even Tolkien, is that these stories retain some truth in them, even if they've become legends. What's also juxtaposed is technocracy versus magic. Magic in a deep sense, not as a manipulation of nature, which is technocracy, but in the sense of understanding the world and the way it is. And this is a point that we really need to draw a distinction between. If we look at Tolkien's world and what magic looks like, it's a good in Gandalf. It's a negative when it's used by Saruman or Sauron, right? There are ways of misusing technology just like you would misuse magic. And for the Inklings, those things are closely tied together, magic and technology. And so the Inklings were always trying to draw the distinction between the old or the deep magic. If you think again of Aslan talking about the stone table and the deep magic that the witch knew nothing of. Her kind of magic is a kind that controls and dominates and relies on power. And that's the same with Nice. Nice in their coordinated experience, they're trying to use technology, their form of applied science and magic, to control the universe and to make it succumb to their desires, rather than working within it to fulfill greater needs of the earth, of human beings, of moving them towards something that is higher and more ascendant. So it's really about the motivations and the uses of these magics and then the ends that are accomplished versus magic in and of itself being a negative or a problem, the way maybe some fundamentalist Christians would be thinking of magic just in all of its form. For them, Merlin would be the kind, not for them, sorry, for Lewis and Tolkien, Merlin was the kind of magician who would have been against technocracy, against the false uses of magic for power. Numenor is a concept that Lewis stole from Tolkien. He was trying to pay tribute to his friends by constantly stealing things. and Tolkien points out that he even spelled it wrong. This is a decade after Tolkien has written The Hobbit, but it is still 10 years away from his publishing of Lord of the Rings. But he was reading those to Lewis and the rest of the Inklings during this time. And Lewis would have been drawn to this idea of the true West, the Numenor, which Merlin was a part of. Dimble makes an observation that I think is supposed to apply to this understanding of logos versus Britain. He tells his wife, good is always getting better and bad is getting worse, and the possibilities of apparent neutrality are always diminishing. That as these two worlds are overlapping less and less and less, you can see the distinctions between them, but it becomes impossible to be lukewarm. It becomes impossible to be in the middle, that you have to choose which side you are on as these things grow further and further from one another. When Ransom is talking to Merlin about this, he explains the hideous strength confronts us, as in the days when Nimrod built a tower to reach heaven. So the Tower of Babel that Mr. Strake talks about, without naming the Tower of Babel, but his mission to bring the communist and materialist vision of the kingdom of God to earth, is what Ransom calls the hideous strength. And he refers to it as this darkness that is overpowering the whole, not just Britain, but everywhere there is a Britain versus logrus, in every country, in every place. And this is what it looks like for their time and place. After every Arthur or Mordred, behind every Milton a Cromwell. A nation of poets versus a nation of shopkeepers. Or in G.K. Chesterton's work, poets versus anarchists. I want to spend some time on Mark's move away from nice. When he goes and sees the head, you would assume that after seeing the head, he would find it so abhorrent, which he did physically, but then he rationalizes it because he does not want to lose his place. The ideas of remaining in the inner ring have become so strong to him that he doesn't understand how revolting his allegiance to this head is. The revulsion has not overpowered his desire or attraction to the inner ring. When he goes to get his wife to bring her, as Wither and Hardcastle have basically blackmailed him into bringing her, he goes and seeks Dimble, because Dimble is still spending sometimes at his college rooms in the office at Bracton College. And when he sees himself through Dimble's eyes, he begins to realize what he has become. It is not yet, it is a gradual move. And this is something that Lewis shows in Surprised by Joy. The move towards faith, or away from secularism, away from atheism, is gradual and not sudden. The conversion of the will may take place suddenly, as it does for Lewis, but the move has to be a gradual move of imagination, seeing differently, intellectual moves, which we'll watch Mark do, and then a conversion of the will. So first, Mark begins to see things differently.